processed and executed on either a PlayStation or a Sega Dreamcast, fired through standard definition cabling to your television set and drilled deep into your eyeballs with a rusty bit. Welcome to Planet Horror for the review of Nightmare Creatures 2. Developed by Callisto Entertainment, and unlike the first game, the sequel never saw its way onto the Nintendo 64. And instead of Activision, was published by Konami, the same company behind the Silent Hill series. You play as Herbert Wallace, an escaped test subject that's been held for years captive in Adam Crowley's genetics hospital. The demonic antagonist from the first game, Dr. Crowley, is unleashing evil monsters on the citizens of London. Wallace must fight thousands of monsters through the streets of London and Paris to reap a revenge on Crowley and save his beloved Rachel, and the world, from a nightmarish demise. The game boasts about having a Rob Zombie soundtrack, but the music is all hidden in the intro and in cutscenes. It warrants having a metal soundtrack throughout the whole game, or at least to mark boss battles. Bands like Cold Chamber, Murder Dolls, Danzig, Misfits, Marilyn Manson, and of course Rob Zombie came to mind as I was playing through it. Unfortunately, the game's soundtrack was boring and monotonous, and just basically industrial noises really, clinks, dinks, whomps, and it didn't really change much from that. It could have really done with an injection of excitement during mini-boss battles, and using heavy metal would have been perfect for that, I think. The voice acting in cutscenes was classic B-movie, perhaps a little like the first Resident Evil. Enemies only exhibited a series of grunts and groans, but did have a rather fetching Tim Burton-esque characteristic, elongated limbs, and looked twisted and strange. There's a range of monsters. Some look like typical zombies, others more like mythical creatures, inspired from real-world wildlife. Lions, leopards, and lizards like geckos and frogs and crocodiles. There was one zombie with tentacles, and it was a lot like the Aegis boss seen in the 2010 Splatterhouse game. Also, a zombie Hulk makes an appearance as well, well before even Marvel even thought of making one. And what I can only describe as something that looks like the demon spawn of Jar Jar Binks and Chewbacca. Apart from blood that spills up the walls and goes all over the floor, fights with enemies would leave little to no sense of reward if it weren't for the special fatality finishes. The game felt far too long and could have done with being just a quarter of the length, using just the highlights, the best bits from the game's areas and objectives, and instead of repeating mini bosses over and over, only meeting them once and maybe again right at the end. The find a key open a door structure is an uninspired beast and was overused. Moving on to the gameplay. Playing on the Dreamcast, I found the best way to play was using the directional pad. Movements from the analog stick just weren't as fluid. Swimming sections weren't actually that bad. Probably some of the best I've actually encountered in early 3D games so far. There were special kills you could pick up along the way. One that froze the creatures, allowing you to finish them however you liked, and they'd shatter into pieces. There was a pistol that gave me the feeling of being Indiana Jones in the gun versus sword scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark. You'll have one running at you and you just whip it out and blast it. Easily the best special kill was the one that would obliterate the enemy into bite-sized chunks. I'd have preferred it if every kill in the game was like this. In fact, I'd prefer it if a lot of other games had that kill. Being a game of the millennium, it's hard to remember what games were like back then. But things like the way Wallace's bandages would flap in the air, and the way enemies would stutter and crawl, was impressive in its day, but don't do much to excite nowadays. I really liked the creepy gothic art style. I even liked the comic book style artwork on the game box. Wallace's blood-stained trench coat, bandages, crazy bold in places haircut was unique. And there was something a little Marilyn Manson Cold Chamber about his appearance. Kicking over trolleys, kicking open boxes, and breaking windows, generally just breaking stuff, was quite fun. And there was a hint of Resident Evil 6 in the cemetery level. To summarise, overall the game was challenging and relied heavily on the use of combos and blocking in combat, featured some interesting looking nightmare creatures, a crazy looking protagonist and some memorable levels. It wasn't your typical survival horror, more of a hack and slash with horror styling. Unfortunately it was far too long, and repetitive design extinguished the fun flames before it really set ablaze.